I always believed that family was supposed to be your safe place, the people who stood by you, especially during the moments that mattered most. But for me, those moments always came and went, without me. My name is Rachel Thomas. I'm 28 years old, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a freelance wedding photographer. I spend my days capturing the happiest days of other people's lives, smiles, tears, first dances, father-daughter walks. I get to be there for strangers. And yet somehow, I was never there for the people who were supposed to be mine. I'm the youngest of 5, 3 brothers, James, Daniel, and Alex, and 1 sister, Sophia. They're all older than me by at least 7 years, some by 15. So growing up, I was always the baby, the one left behind, the one too young to matter. The first time I was left out was James's wedding in San Diego. I was 10. The excuse? Child-free ceremony. So, I remember overhearing my parents talk about it like it was a given. I didn't even get asked if I wanted to go. I liked James's fiancée, still do, but I never got to see her walk down the aisle. I remember sitting on my bed, staring at the door, hoping someone would come in and say, "Change of plans, you're coming with us." No one did. 2 years later, Daniel got married, this time in Aspen. I was 13, old enough to write a letter, so I did. I slipped it under his bedroom door before he left for the trip. "Dear Daniel, I don't want to be in the wedding. I just want to see it. I promise I'll be quiet and sit in the back. Please let me come." He never said a word about it. Not then, not ever. At 16, it was Sophia's turn. She got married in Napa Valley. I remember walking into her room, clutching a pair of silver flats I'd saved up for. "I'll be quiet. I'll stay out of the way," I said, almost whispering. She looked at me and said, "I can't bend the rules just for you. It wouldn't be fair to the other kids." I wasn't some random kid. I was her sister, her little sister. And by the time Alex got married in New York when I was 18, I didn't even bother asking. I'd just graduated high school, legally an adult, but still, invisible. I remember scrolling through social media the night of his wedding. Everyone was dressed up, beaming, champagne glasses, dancing, family. And me? I sat alone in my bedroom, watching Instagram stories like a ghost in my own life. It wasn't just about being excluded from the weddings. It was the message each one sent. You don't matter enough. You're not one of us. You're not worth the invite. Over time, that message settled into my bones. I didn't even realize how deep it had gone until everything changed. I met Evan Carter at an art gallery 2 years ago. He teaches high school art. He's warm, grounded, and kind in ways I never knew a person could be. On our second date, he asked if I'd ever photographed a wedding I wished I was in. I laughed. "All of them," I said. We fell in love slow and steady, the kind of love that doesn't scream, but holds you quietly, consistently. He proposed in the middle of a sunflower field last spring, and I said yes before he could finish the question. Planning our wedding felt unreal. Suddenly, I was the one in charge, the one deciding who would be there, the one with the list. One evening, I sat at my laptop, scrolling through my digital guest list. The usual names popped up: childhood best friend, college roommate, favorite cousin, Evan's hilarious aunt. Then, my family, James, Daniel, Sophia, Alex. I hovered over each name. My fingers didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. There was only a strange, calm certainty. Click, delete, click, delete, click, delete, click, delete. For years, I sat on the sidelines, watching their lives unfold from afar, watching them toast, kiss, dance, celebrate, without me. This time, they'd be the ones watching. From the outside, this wasn't revenge, not really. It was balance. And maybe, just maybe, justice. Planning the wedding felt like walking on clouds. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions that weren't filtered through someone else's comfort. I didn't need to ask permission or tiptoe around people's feelings. This was mine, ours. But one choice still lingered in the air, like a silent storm cloud. And that was the choice not to invite my siblings. One evening, while finalizing the RSVP list, Evan walked in holding 2 mugs of tea. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently, handing me one. I looked up from my laptop. "About not inviting them?" He nodded. I sighed. "I don't know if I'm sure, but I'm done pretending like it didn't hurt. I'm done being the only one who was supposed to be okay with being forgotten." Evan sat beside me, his hand resting softly on my knee. "You're not being cruel. You're being honest. And maybe, for the first time, you're being honest with yourself." That moment solidified it. I closed the laptop. The list was final. They weren't on it. In the weeks that followed, the silence became loud. I didn't post much about the wedding, didn't share my dress or venue on Instagram, no countdowns or flower arrangements on Facebook. I just quietly planned the day I'd waited my whole life for, without them. But people noticed. My mom, Linda, texted one night out of the blue. "Rachel, let us know when to save the date. You're still sending invites, right?" I stared at the message for a long while, then locked my phone. No reply. A few days later, Sophia posted a meme in the family group chat. One of those cutesy quotes with a passive-aggressive twist. "Families are like fudge, mostly sweet with a few nuts." I almost laughed. It was so textbook Sophia. Smile while she cuts you. Still, I didn't respond. But as the wedding date drew closer, their confusion turned into suspicion. James sent a private message. "Hey, did you forget to mail ours?" Daniel left a voicemail. "Just checking in, wondering if maybe there was a mix-up." Sophia posted publicly. "Anyone else not get an invite? Just curious." Alex didn't say a word, but his wife Lacey posted a picture of them clinking champagne glasses with the caption, "Some weddings don't deserve your energy anyway." I saw it all. I ignored it all, and somehow, that drove them crazier than any reply would have. Then came the call. My phone buzzed one evening while Evan and I were having dinner. It was my mom. I hesitated. Evan glanced at the screen, then at me. "You don't have to pick up," he said softly, but I did. Maybe I needed to hear it, just once. "Rachel?" Her voice was already tight. "Hi, Mom." "What's going on?" she said quickly, skipping the niceties. "Your siblings haven't received invitations. Is something wrong? Did something happen?" I took a breath. "They never invited me to their weddings, Mom. I thought we were just keeping that same energy." There was silence, heavy, cold. Then her voice cracked. "Oh, come on, don't be petty. You're better than this." I felt my jaw clench. "No, I'm finally being real, and I'm done pretending I wasn't hurt." She didn't respond with comfort or understanding. Instead, her tone sharpened. "Has Evan been putting these thoughts in your head? You've changed, Rachel. You used to be sweet. Now you sound like a stranger." I almost laughed. Of course she blamed someone else. It couldn't possibly be her or them. "It's not about Evan. This is me, Mom. Me making a decision for once." And just like that, she hung up. That night, I pulled out an old keepsake box from the back of my closet. Inside were old letters, notes, concert stubs, pieces of a life that tried to be normal. On top was a folded piece of notebook paper. I knew exactly what it was before I opened it. The letter I'd written Daniel when I was 13. "Dear Daniel, I don't want a big part in your wedding. I just want to watch you get married. I promise I'll behave and won't be a bother." It was never opened, never mentioned. I'd slipped it under his door the night before he left for Aspen. 13-year-old me thought maybe, just maybe, love was enough to get an exception. I folded the letter back up. My hands didn't shake. My tears didn't fall. Because this wasn't revenge. It was resolution. The next few days were like a slow boil. Sophia sent a long message filled with fake compassion. "I just wish you had told us how you felt. We could have made it right. You didn't have to go this far." James fired back with full defensiveness. "So now we're the villains? Come on, Rachel. Grow up." Then my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Evan who checked it later. "Greg called me," he said quietly. "Your dad. He wanted to talk some sense into you." "Che." I blinked. "You're kidding. He said you were always dramatic. that you were hurting the family. I told him I wasn't getting in the middle of something I didn't break. God, I love that man. Evan hugged me tight. They're finally realizing they don't get to write your story anymore. And then came the most unexpected message of all. A simple text from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Aunt May. My dad's estranged sister. The one no one talked about. The one I was told went off the deep end. I heard what you're doing. Took guts, sweetheart. Don't let them gaslight you. They did the same to me. I stared at the screen. My throat tightened. I wasn't the only one. They'd done this before. And maybe, just maybe, I was the first to push back. It started with a knock. Not the gentle kind. The kind that made your stomach twist. Evan and I were just finishing lunch on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was still in sweatpants, hair in a messy bun, when the door started vibrating from the pounding. He peeked through the window and turned back to me. "They're here," he said quietly. I didn't have to ask who. When I opened the door, there they were, the whole family. My mom, Linda, in a beige coat, holding what looked like a wedding planner's folder. My dad, Greg, arms crossed, jaw tight. James, Daniel, Sophia, and Alex, all standing in a semicircle like some awkward intervention committee. "We're here to talk," Linda said without greeting. "We're not leaving until we clear this up." For a second, I froze, then stepped aside. "Fine, come in," I said, my voice calm but cold. They entered like strangers. We all sat in the living room. The air was thick. Evan stood in the kitchen, arms folded, watching quietly but ready to step in. Linda opened first, flipping through her folder like she was about to pitch a project. "Rachel, I made a timeline of things we can still plan together. The registry, seating, floral arrangements. There's still time to fix this." I blinked. "Fix what?" James scoffed. "This whole situation. You can't seriously mean to go through with a wedding without your family there." "Family," I repeated. That's rich." Linda frowned. "We're your family, Rachel. This silence, this exclusion, it's immature. You're better than this." Greg finally spoke, his voice gruff. "I didn't raise you to be spiteful." Sophia's eyes welled up with what looked like real tears. "My kids were excited to be flower girls. They cried when they found out they weren't coming." I stared at them. At all of them. Performing guilt? Not processing it. "You're not here for me," I said, voice steady. "You're here to save face." James leaned forward. "That's not fair." I looked directly at him. "Neither was being 10 and told I was just a child when I wanted to see you say your vows." No one replied. Then Daniel threw his hands up. "This is ridiculous. You're still mad about stuff that happened when you were a kid? You've got to let that go." My patience snapped. "You want me to move on from being erased? From watching you all have the biggest days of your lives like I didn't exist? I sat at home alone while you danced and toasted and called yourselves a complete family without me." Linda tried to interrupt. "Rachel, don't yell." "Why not?" I shot back. "You never let me speak before." "So I'm speaking now." Silence. I stood up. "You're not invited to my wedding. That's not changing. You don't get to demand a place in my joy just because we share blood." Greg leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "You'll regret this. Blood is blood." I turned to Evan, who walked over and gently placed his hand on my back. "You see why I need to do this?" I said, not breaking eye contact with my father. Evan nodded. "They just proved it." As they left, one by one, muttering half-hearted goodbyes, I stood in the doorway, watching the rain fall. I didn't feel victorious or vindicated. I felt hollow, but free. And then it hit me, hard. A memory. 16-year-old me, in her bedroom, watching Sophia's wedding live stream. Sitting in silence as the entire family laughed and posed for photos without her. I'd cried so hard that night, I'd fallen asleep in the same dress I'd begged to wear, hoping someone would call and say, "We changed our mind, come." They never did. This time, I wasn't the one left out. They were. The aftermath came quickly. The family group chat lit up like a wildfire. "You've torn this family apart. Your wedding is a joke. Hope Evan is worth it." I exited the chat. No goodbye, no explanation. Linda took it to the next level. calling relatives, church friends, even my old high school art teacher, claiming I was acting out, that I'd changed. One day, Evan handed me his phone. "It's your mom again, calling me this time." I declined the call and blocked her. "It's not about a wedding anymore," I whispered to him. "It's about control, and they just lost it." Instead of falling apart, I poured my energy into planning. Aunt May came over every weekend to help. We walked the venue, chose flowers, tasted cakes. Her presence felt like healing in human form. One day, while we were picking table linens, I looked at her and said, "Would you walk me down the aisle?" She froze, blinking back emotion. "Me? You're the only one who's ever really listened to me." She nodded slowly, holding back tears. "Then it's my honor." Weeks passed, slowly, peacefully. I started to feel something close to excitement. Then, a letter came. No return address. Inside, a wedding card with gold-embossed flowers. No message, just 5 words. "Family is forever. Don't forget." I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mom's. The morning of our wedding, the world felt quiet. No drama, no chaos. Just light pouring through the bedroom window and the scent of fresh lavender from the bouquet Aunt May picked up at the farmer's market the day before. I rolled over to see Evan still asleep, his hair a mess and his arms slung over my waist. For the first time in what felt like forever, my heart didn't carry a weight, just warmth. Today was the day, our day. The ceremony took place at a botanical garden just outside the Columbia River Gorge. We had chosen the spot during a rainy drive months earlier. It wasn't grand, but it was full of color, peace, and everything we loved. The ceremony space was nestled beneath tall evergreens with a small wooden arch draped in white linen and wildflowers. Only 80 people. People who had shown up. People who had chosen us. People who made love feel like something we didn't have to earn. I slipped into my dress just as the sun broke through the clouds. It wasn't designer. It didn't sparkle. It was simple, ivory, and mine. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a woman, not a forgotten girl trying to be noticed. A knock at the door. "Ready?" It was Aunt May. She walked me down the aisle, slowly, gently. Every step felt like a reclamation. When we reached Evan, he was already tearing up. He took my hands like he was holding something sacred. Evan read his vows first. "You taught me that love doesn't have to be loud to be strong, that sometimes the softest hearts carry the heaviest scars, and still, you stayed soft. Then mine. You made me feel like I belonged, when my own blood made me feel like a burden. You never asked me to prove myself. You just loved me. I choose you, today, always." We kissed as the crowd clapped and cheered. No one asked where my family was. No one even mentioned them. Later that evening, while the sun dipped below the trees and fairy lights flickered above us, I danced with Evan beneath the stars. No first dances with Dad, no emotional toasts from a sibling. But I didn't feel empty. I felt exactly right. But peace never lasts long. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages from mutual friends, photos, screenshots, posts. Apparently, while we were saying, "I do," my family had thrown their own dinner party. Same night, same time, in Portland. A family gathering. My mother in a cream pantsuit. My dad carving roast beef. Sophia and Daniel laughing over wine. One caption read, "True family never misses a celebration." Another, "Real love is unconditional." I stared at my phone, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. They weren't celebrating me, I told Evan. They were protesting me. Days later, the online comments started. Sophia commented under a reposted wedding photo of me and Evan. "Saw some pics. Cute, but the flowers looked kinda basic." James added, "Could have asked for help with that decor, sis." Daniel posted a cryptic story. "When you choose bitterness over family, don't expect to bloom." They'd somehow gotten photos from mutual acquaintances. Pictures I'd chosen not to post, yet they still found their way into the hands of people I never invited. They weren't just being petty, they were invading something sacred. They hadn't been there, but now they wanted to pick it apart like they had a right. I stayed silent. Until one night there was a knock. I knew before I opened the door. My mother stood there, again, holding a small, white envelope. "I saw the pictures," she said flatly. "That wedding wasn't worthy of you, or of us." I blinked. "You weren't even invited." She didn't flinch. "You turned your back on the people who raised you." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "No," I said, voice steady. "I turned away from the people who never showed up." Her face tightened. Her eyes were glossy, but I wasn't sure it was from pain or pride. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll regret it in peace." She shoved the envelope into my hand and left. Inside was a card. "No matter what, we're your family." No signature. A week later, Evan and I stood in the kitchen, dancing slowly to music playing from his phone. It was our almost honeymoon. We hadn't gone anywhere, just took time off to exist. I rested my head on his chest. "No drama," I whispered. "Just us," he said, and for the first time in my life, just us was more than enough. It was a Wednesday morning when everything changed. I stood barefoot in the bathroom, staring at a white stick on the counter. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. My breath caught in my throat. My hand covered my mouth, heart pounding so hard I thought it might shake the room. Then Evan walked in, toothbrush in hand, hair messy from sleep. He froze when he saw my face. "Is that—" I nodded, barely able to speak. "We're having a baby." The toothbrush hit the sink. He rushed forward and wrapped me in his arms. I started to cry. Soft at first, then hard, like my body had been holding in every emotion for years. That night, we lay in bed, fingers intertwined over my stomach. "I want them to feel safe," I whispered. "They will," Evan said, "because you'll make sure of it." I paused, my voice shaking. "I want them to know love that doesn't require apology. I want them to grow up, never doubting they belong." Evan kissed my forehead. "They'll know, because they'll have you." We decided to keep the news to ourselves, at least for a little while. Just us, just joy. But of course, nothing stays quiet forever. A week later, I got a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Heard the news. Congrats, Mama." I froze. "How?" Evan looked up from the couch. "What's wrong?" "They know." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. 2 days later, the messages started. The first came from Linda. "Rachel, I heard you're pregnant. Despite everything, we're still your family. That baby deserves to know their grandparents." I didn't respond. Then Sophia. "Congratulations. Look, I know we've had issues, but we're sisters. I want to be there for you, and for the baby." Then Daniel. "Hold on to your grudge if you want, but don't punish the child. He deserves a big family." James even sent a photo of his own kids with the caption, "Cousins waiting to meet their new teammate." It might have been funny if it weren't so painfully manipulative. Evan and I sat in silence, phones lighting up every few minutes. "You don't owe them a damn thing," he said eventually. "I know," I whispered, "but it still hurts." I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was tired. Tired of having to defend the walls I built to protect myself. Tired of being the villain in a story they wrote. We made a decision that night. There would be no visits, no pictures, no sudden appearances. Our child would grow up surrounded by love, but not by manipulation, not by guilt, not by people who only showed up when they felt excluded. "This child will never feel the weight I carried," I said aloud. "Not on my watch." But it wasn't over yet. 1 week later, Linda showed up at our door. Again. This time, she looked different. Her makeup was minimal, her posture less composed. She held a small teddy bear in her arms. "I brought something for the baby," she said quietly. "Please don't shut us out." I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway. "You had years to be my mother," I said. "Now I'm protecting mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "You'll regret this, Rachel. Families fight. Families fall apart. But they come back together. That's what love is." I nodded slowly. "Maybe. but at least I'll regret it in peace. I closed the door. This time, I didn't feel shaken. I felt free. The months passed quietly. I started journaling every night, writing letters to my unborn child, some joyful, some fearful, all honest. I joined a group for first-time moms, started nesting, brought Aunt May to ultrasound appointments. She cried every time the heartbeat came through the speakers. "You're going to be such a good mother," she told me one day, squeezing my hand. "I'm scared," I admitted. "That's how I know you'll be great," she said. One afternoon, I sat in the nursery alone. The walls were pale green. A rocking chair sat by the window. I picked up a tiny onesie and held it to my chest. And for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I'd spent years trying to fix myself, thinking something was wrong with me for being hurt, for remembering, for needing more. But there was never anything wrong with me. They just never made space for me. Now I was creating a space no one could take away. Then the day came. A long, painful labor, 19 hours. But when they placed him in my arms, I forgot the pain. My son. Tiny. Red-faced. Perfect. I looked at him and knew, without a doubt, he would never cry alone behind a closed door wondering why the people who were supposed to love him chose to leave him out. He would never write letters begging for love. He would never have to earn his place. Later that night, in the hospital room, Evan slept on the couch beside us. I held my son to my chest and whispered, "They called me selfish, spiteful, dramatic, but all I ever wanted was to be loved without condition. That's what I'll give you. That's what I'll leave behind. My legacy won't be silence. It will be love."